The music swelled, violins cutting through the air as my daughter walked across the marble floor of the grand ballroom. Chandeliers dripped with crystals overhead. Photographers lined the aisles, and the scent of roses and expensive perfume choked the room. I should have been proud. This was her day. Instead, I felt the knot in my stomach twist tighter with every step she took. When the announcer called for the bride to introduce her family, my chest filled with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I had dreamed of this moment. Of hearing her say, "This is my father, the man who raised me alone after Mom passed, the man who sacrificed everything for me." But she smiled, too sharp, too cold, and into the microphone she laughed. "Everyone, this is my dad. He's a janitor." Laughter rippled across the hall like broken glass scattering across marble. The groom's mother raised her champagne glass with a smirk. Someone whispered, "No wonder she married up." Camera flashes exploded, freezing my humiliation forever in photographs. I stood there, hands trembling, smelling the faint bleach that never left my skin. Years of night shifts, missed meals, and unpaid bills, all reduced to a cruel punchline. My heart pounded in my ears, louder than the music, louder than the laughter. For a moment I thought I'd collapse. But instead I swallowed the fire clawing up my throat, looked straight at my daughter and whispered so only I could hear, "You'll regret this." The laughter faded, but in that silence, something darker was born. The night after the wedding, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The house was dark except for the dull yellow glow of the single bulb above me, flickering now and then, like even it couldn't stand to watch me anymore. My hands rested on the wooden surface, palms flat, trembling. They were cracked and rough, knuckles swollen from years of scrubbing, hauling and mopping. Even after a hot shower, the faint sour tang of bleach clung to my skin. No matter how hard I scrubbed, it never left me. I turned my hands over slowly, staring at the deep lines carved into them, lines that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with sacrifice. These were the same hands that once cupped my newborn daughter's fragile head, her soft hair damp with sweat, as she cried for her mother who never came home. The same hands that held her fevered body against my chest when sickness threatened to take her too. And now, those hands had been laughed at, mocked in front of strangers, reduced to a cruel joke. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was back there again, back in the hospital room when everything changed. My wife lay still, the life drained from her after childbirth complications. I remembered clutching her cold hand, whispering promises through tears that I would never let our daughter suffer, that no matter how hard life became, I would carry her through it. That was the day my hands stopped being just hands. They became tools of survival. I took on the janitor job, not because it was glamorous, but because it was steady. Nights, weekends, holidays, it didn't matter. I cleaned office floors while others celebrated Christmas. I emptied trash bins while fathers tucked their children into bed. And every dollar I earned, every blister I collected, went into raising my daughter. There were nights I'd come home so tired I couldn't even eat. I'd collapse on the couch, still in my work boots, only to wake up 2 hours later to her tiny voice whispering, "Daddy, wake up. You didn't eat." She would try to bring me water in her little hands, spilling half of it along the way, her face proud as if she was taking care of me. I skipped meals so she could eat. I wore the same pair of work shoes until the soles flapped like broken wings, while she had new sneakers for school. I even sold my wedding ring one winter, when tuition fees came due. That ring had been the last piece of my wife I could touch, and pawning it nearly killed me. But when I handed that money over to the school administrator, I told myself she's worth more than gold. Years passed like this, one sacrifice bleeding into the next. I remember the night she came home from school, her arms full of books. She dropped them on the table, beaming. "One day, Dad, I'll make you proud," she said. I hugged her then, my face buried in her hair, hiding my tears. You already have, I thought, but as the years rolled on, something shifted. The little girl who once clung to my leg when I left for work started pulling away. She became embarrassed by the smell of bleach on my clothes, the scuffs on my boots. I told myself it was just teenage pride, that deep down she still loved me the same. I kept working, kept pushing, believing the day would come when she'd stand tall and say, "That's my father. He's the reason I'm here." That day never came. Instead, I stood at her wedding, dressed in a borrowed suit that pinched at the shoulders, my hands twitching nervously as I waited for her to acknowledge me. And then she laughed, as if my life's work had been nothing but a joke. I could feel every camera in the room aimed at me, freezing my humiliation in time. The smirks, the whispers, they cut deeper than any blade. But something else happened that night. Something I couldn't ignore. As I stood there burning in shame, I noticed movement at the edge of the ballroom. The groom's mother, draped in diamonds and pearls, leaned toward my daughter, her jeweled hand slipping a small envelope into hers. My daughter accepted it quickly, her eyes darting toward me, then back to her new in-laws. A shiver ran through me. That envelope wasn't a gift. It was too discreet, too secretive. The way the mother-in-law pressed her lips into a smile told me everything I needed to know. My daughter wasn't just marrying into their family. She was becoming theirs completely, owned and bought. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the image stuck in my head. What was in that envelope? Money, documents, instructions? Whatever it wasn't meant for me to see. I pushed the thought aside, but it came back stronger when I replayed the moment in my mind. I realized that when she had mocked me as just a janitor, the groom's family had been watching closely. Their smiles hadn't been spontaneous. They had been satisfied, pleased, almost as though it had been rehearsed. The pit in my stomach deepened. Back home, I sat staring at my hands again, flexing the stiff joints, feeling the rough skin scrape against the wood of the table. These hands had built her life, but what if they had only built her cage? What if in giving her everything, I had unknowingly given her to them? I whispered to the silence around me. What did they give you in return for your shame? The house didn't answer. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and cruel, each second hammering home the truth. My daughter was no longer mine. She belonged to them now, but as I stared at my hands, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation of the wedding hadn't broken me. It had lit a fire I didn't know I still had. My daughter might hide me, but I knew the truth of who I was, and I knew that secrets, once uncovered, had the power to destroy. At the edge of my mind, the image of that envelope burned brighter and brighter. I would find out what was inside, no matter what it took. Because if they thought I was just a janitor, they had no idea what these hands were capable of. That night, as I replayed the wedding in my mind, I couldn't shake the sight of the groom's mother's jeweled hand slipping that envelope to my daughter. I clenched my fists, bleach-stained and calloused, and whispered into the dark, "They think I'm invisible." But I saw everything, and I knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the wedding, I woke with the weight of humiliation pressing down on my chest, heavier than the blankets I kicked to the floor. My head throbbed from the endless replay of last night, the mocking laughter, the flash of cameras, my daughter's cold words that cut me deeper than any knife ever could. Sunlight leaked through the thin curtains. Too harsh, too unforgiving, illuminating the borrowed suit jacket hanging limply on the back of a chair. I had promised to return it today, neatly pressed and spotless, just as it had been loaned to me. Dragging myself out of bed, I reached for the jacket. My fingers brushed against the fabric, and something crinkled inside the breast pocket. At first, I thought it was just a scrap of tissue. But when I pulled it out, I froze. It was a receipt. Not just any receipt. A long, elegant slip printed on glossy paper, the logo embossed in gold. I recognized the boutique instantly. I had walked past it countless times on my way home from work. The mannequins in the window dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly salary. I never dared step inside. Men like me didn't belong in stores like that. I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the neat black ink. The date was clear, 3 days before the wedding. The purchase, a designer necklace worth more than my entire savings account. My throat tightened when I read the buyer's name. It wasn't hers. It was billed to the groom's father. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the receipt so tightly the edges cut into my skin. My mind raced. Why would he buy her jewelry? And why was it in my suit pocket? I stumbled into the kitchen and sat down heavily, laying the receipt on the table next to my own battered time cards from work. The contrast made my stomach churn. His receipt gleamed crisp, untouched by sweat or dirt. My time cards were creased, smudged with ink and grime, the corners frayed from being stuffed into my pockets day after day. That receipt represented power, wealth, control. My cards represented sacrifice, survival, endurance. And yet it seemed my daughter valued his gold-stamped generosity more than my years of blood and sweat. I thought back to the envelope the groom's mother had slipped her. Was this part of the same scheme? Was my daughter just being manipulated? Or had she chosen this life, chosen them, chosen to erase me? The thought dug into me like a claw. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and memories flooded in uninvited. I remembered the first time she begged me for a necklace. She was 7, standing in front of a street vendor's stall, her eyes shining as she pointed at a small pendant shaped like a heart. It wasn't real silver, just cheap metal, but it glittered in her eyes like treasure. I told her maybe next time. We needed that money for food. She nodded quietly, not making a scene, but I saw the disappointment settle in her face. That night I worked an extra shift, and 2 weeks later I surprised her with that necklace. She wore it everywhere, even to bed, and now she wore diamonds from another man's wallet, smiling at him while pretending her own father didn't exist. The bitterness curdled in my throat. I picked up the receipt again, running my thumb over the raised lettering. A single question throbbed in my head. Was this a gift or a leash? I couldn't shake the image of the groom's father smirking at the wedding, his hand resting too comfortably on my daughter's shoulder. Did they see me as so pathetic, so worthless, that they thought they could buy her loyalty right in front of me? The air in the kitchen felt heavy, pressing down on me. I got up, pacing the narrow room, the floorboards creaking under my weight. My mind twisted between suspicion and denial. Maybe she didn't know who paid. Maybe he surprised her. Maybe she didn't mean to humiliate me last night. Maybe. But the memory of her laughter crushed that hope. She knew exactly what she was doing. I slammed my fists onto the table, the sound echoing through the empty house. The receipt fluttered to the floor, landing near my boots. I bent down slowly, staring at it lying there like evidence at a crime scene. For the first time, I wondered if my daughter had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. I gathered the jacket to return it, but the weight in my pocket lingered, even though the receipt was gone. I folded the paper carefully, sliding it into the back of my wallet. Proof. I didn't know what it proved yet, but instinct told me it was important. That instinct had kept me alive through years of scraping by, through nights when there was more month than money, through days when I had nothing but hope to cling to. It was whispering again now, telling me to hold on, to watch, to dig deeper. As I prepared to leave the house, my phone buzzed on the counter. At first I ignored it, thinking it was just another bill reminder I didn't want to see. But the buzzing continued, insistent, until I finally snatched it up. The number was blocked. Unknown. My thumb hesitated before unlocking the screen. A single message blinked at me. You deserve better than how she treated you. My pulse thundered in my ears. I read it again, then again, the words etching themselves into me. Someone out there had seen what happened. Someone knew, but who? And why now? I stared at the message until the letters blurred. A chill crawled up my spine. This wasn't just pity. It was a door creaking open into something larger, something dangerous. I looked down at my hands again, cracked, scarred, permanently marked by bleach, and clenched them into fists. If they thought I was invisible, if they thought they could buy her loyalty and laugh me into silence, they were wrong, because whoever sent that message had just given me the first thread to pull, and I was ready to unravel everything. The receipt burned in my wallet like a brand, and the mysterious text pulsed on my screen. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel broken. I felt awake, and somewhere deep in my gut, I knew this was only the first secret. The automatic doors of the grocery store slid open with a low hiss, releasing a wave of artificial cool air that clashed with the sticky warmth outside. I stepped inside, pushing a cart that rattled with a broken wheel, the sound grating in the silence of my thoughts. All I wanted was bread, milk, maybe a few cans of soup to stretch through the week. But the moment I entered, I felt it. The shift in the air, the glances that lingered just a second too long, the whispered tones that faded when I got close. I pulled my cap lower over my eyes, pretending not to notice. But how could I not? Their stares burned into me, mothers clutching their children's hands, old men leaning on carts, teenagers with their phones half raised, as if waiting for a chance to snap a picture. The whispers started near the produce aisle. 2 women stood by the apples, their voices low but sharp enough to cut. That's him, the janitor. God, can you imagine? Your own daughter laughing at you on her wedding day? I saw the clip. It's everywhere. Embarrassing doesn't even cover it. My chest tightened. I turned away, gripping the cart until my knuckles whitened. But their words followed me, chasing me down the aisles. By the frozen food section, I couldn't resist anymore. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hands trembling as I unlocked it, and there it was. Flooding my screen, the viral video. Someone had captured the exact moment my daughter had smiled into the microphone and introduced me as just the janitor. The clip had been replayed thousands of times. The caption blazed in bold letters across the bottom. Even her dad is just a janitor. The comments scrolled endlessly. I'd die of shame if that were my father. Can't believe she admitted it on her wedding day. Money changes people. She's upgraded. He's nothing now. Each word pierced me deeper, hollowing me out. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. Just the janitor. That phrase looped in my head like a curse. My sacrifices, my sleepless nights, my empty stomach so she could be full, none of it mattered now. To the world, I was a joke. To my daughter, I was a stain she had scrubbed out of her new life. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, leaning heavily against the freezer door, the cold glass numbing my arm. I muttered under my breath, barely audible even to myself. She erased me in front of everyone. The words tasted like rust, bitter and final. But as I stood there watching strangers glance my way, something else stirred beneath the shame. Determination. A slow, simmering heat that spread through my chest. She might have erased me in front of them, but I wasn't gone. I was still here, still breathing, still watching, and I would make sure she remembered who I was. I left the store with only a loaf of bread, my head down, but my mind racing. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, stretching shadows across the parking lot. I paused by the cart return, the sound of laughter drifting toward me. Two men leaned against a black luxury car near the edge of the lot, smoking cigars. Their suits were expensive, their voices loud with arrogance. I recognized one of them instantly, the groom's father. Even from a distance, his posture screamed entitlement. His smile slick with false charm. I didn't mean to listen, but their voices carried across the open air, slicing through the hum of traffic. "Don't worry," the groom's father said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "We've secured everything in her name." "He can't touch it," the other man chuckled. "Smart, cut the old man out completely. Can't risk him trying to cling to what's not his." My stomach dropped, the bread in my hand suddenly feeling like a stone. My daughter's name, secured, assets, documents. It all connected at once, the envelope at the wedding, the receipt in my suit pocket, now this. They were tying her to them, locking her in with contracts and money, and at the same time severing me from her life completely. I stood frozen, heart pounding, the shame from earlier morphing into something sharper, colder. So that was it. They hadn't just humiliated me for sport. They were erasing me legally, financially, piece by piece, until I no longer existed at all. The groom's father laughed again, flicking ash onto the pavement. "By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." The other man grinned. "He's just the janitor. What's he going to do?" The words echoed like a challenge, striking deep into me. I turned away quickly, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. They thought I was powerless. They thought bleach-stained hands couldn't hold anything but a mop. They thought I wouldn't fight, but they were wrong. I walked to my car, each step heavy with the weight of what I had just heard. My shame had been fuel, but now suspicion sharpened into resolve. If they had secured everything in her name, if they were using her as a pawn, then I would uncover the truth, and when I did, no amount of money, no viral clip, no smug smirk would protect them. As I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel, the words replayed in my head. "We've secured everything in her name. He can't touch it." They thought I was finished. But I whispered into the silence, low and certain, "They've just given me a reason to fight." The building loomed above me like a monolith, all glass and steel, its mirrored walls catching the glow of the city lights. I had cleaned this place for years, long before the groom's family owned it. Tonight, though, I walked in with a different purpose. My ID badge beeped at the scanner, the familiar click of the lock opening, and I stepped inside carrying nothing but my mop bucket and an ache in my chest that never seemed to fade anymore. The lobby was silent. Polished marble floors stretched out like a frozen lake, reflecting the soft light of the chandeliers overhead. I could smell the faint traces of perfume left by executives who had passed through earlier in the day. Expensive, sharp, the kind of scent that clung to power. As always, I started with the routine. Sweeping, mopping, emptying bins. But tonight I wasn't just cleaning floors. I was listening, watching, waiting. Around midnight, when most of the building was dark, I made my way to the executive floor. Their offices were larger than my entire apartment, lined with glass walls and thick carpets that muffled every step. I paused outside the groom's office. The door cracked slightly. Voices drifted into the hallway. At first I froze, mop in hand. Then I leaned closer, holding my breath. It was them, my daughter and her husband. "You need to cut him off completely," the groom's voice said, calm but firm. "No visits. No calls, nothing. If you let him linger, he'll cling on forever." My heart hammered in my chest. Her voice followed, softer but clear. "But he's my father." A pause. Then the groom again, sharper this time. "He's a janitor. He'll drag us down. My parents won't tolerate him hanging around. You have to choose, this family or him." I gripped the mop handle so tightly my knuckles ached, and then came her answer, barely above a whisper but heavy enough to crush me. "I know." "You're right," I staggered back, my body trembling. For years I had told myself she was trapped, manipulated, pressured into shame. But hearing her agree, hearing her voice bend toward their will, it shattered something inside me. I forced myself to move, pushing the mop bucket into the janitor's closet down the hall. My breath came in ragged bursts. I couldn't confront them, not yet. Words meant nothing against people like them. I needed proof. That's when the idea struck me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small camera. It wasn't much, cheap, the kind of thing you'd find online for a few bills. I'd bought it years ago, thinking I might use it for security at home, but it had sat untouched in a drawer until now. My hands shook as I adjusted the angle, setting it on a shelf high in the closet, tucked behind bottles of disinfectant. From that closet, I had a direct line to the hallway, a perfect view of anyone coming or going from those offices. I stared at my mop bucket, the dirty water sloshing inside. For years it had been my burden, my reminder of how low I'd sunk just to survive. But tonight I saw it differently. This bucket didn't just carry water, it carried secrets now. Secrets I intended to use. Hours later, after finishing my shift, I returned home with the hidden camera in my bag. My apartment felt smaller than ever, its peeling wallpaper and dim light suffocating me. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where the receipt had burned me days before, and connected the camera to my old laptop. The footage began to play. At first it was nothing but silence, empty hallways, shadows moving across the glass. I fast-forwarded, eyes heavy from exhaustion, until the timestamp hit the moment I remembered. Voices filled the speakers, faint but clear. My daughter and the groom stood just outside the closet, their silhouettes visible. "He doesn't belong here," the groom's voice said again. "My family can't be tied to someone like that. We're building a future. He has no place in it." And then came the part that hollowed me out. Her voice, my daughter's voice. The same one that once promised me she'd make me proud. Now cold and dismissive. "He's nothing to me now, just the help." The words rang in the tiny kitchen like a gunshot. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my mouth dry. Just the help. The phrase clung to me like the bleach smell on my skin, impossible to wash away. My chest tightened, the ache spreading into something darker. Rage, grief, betrayal, all twisted into one. I had been humiliated at her wedding, mocked by strangers online, dismissed by neighbors. But this was different. This was her voice, her choice, her truth. I pressed pause, the image freezing on their blurred figures. My reflection stared back at me in the black edges of the screen. A man worn down, beaten, forgotten, but not broken. "Not yet," I whispered into the silence, each word shaking but sharp. "If I'm just the help, then you've underestimated me." I closed the laptop, the faint click sounding like the closing of a coffin lid, because now I had proof. And proof was power. The footage replayed in my head long after I shut it off, her voice cold, final, unrecognizable. "He's nothing to me now, just the help." I clenched my fist, staring at the mop bucket still sitting by the door. They thought it was a symbol of shame. But they had no idea. It was my weapon now. The apartment was quieter than usual that night. No buzzing phone, No neighbors stomping upstairs, not even the hum of traffic outside. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press against the walls. I sat at the table. The glow of the laptop dimmed, her words still replaying in my head. He's nothing to me now, just the help. Those words didn't just cut me, they gutted me. Because in that moment, I knew I had lost more than my daughter. I had lost the last promise I made to my wife. My eyes drifted to the bookshelf in the corner. Just clung to the spines of books I hadn't touched in years. Relics of a different time. Cookbooks she once loved, photo albums, and one item that caught the light even in the shadows, her old Bible. I rose slowly, almost afraid, and pulled it down. The leather cover was cracked, the edges worn from her hands, flipping through it night after night. I held it against my chest for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that still lingered. Impossibly, after all these years, when I opened it, a folded slip of paper slid out and fluttered onto the floor. I bent down, picked it up, and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting hit me first, her handwriting. Slanted, graceful, a script I hadn't seen in so long. My throat tightened as I read. If she ever forgets where she came from, remind her. Keep her humble. Teach her respect. Promise me she'll never lose the heart we raised her with. I sank into the chair, the letter trembling in my hands. Tears blurred the ink, but I didn't wipe them away. I could hear her voice as if she were standing in the room, whispering it to me, with that quiet strength she always carried. I whispered back, hoarse and broken. I promised. I promised you I'd keep her on the right path. And now look at her. The letter crumpled slightly in my grip. My jaw tightened and the words slipped out before I could stop them. If your mother were alive, she'd weep to see you now. It wasn't anger that filled me in that moment. It was grief. Grief for the woman I had loved, for the daughter we had raised, for the family that had been reduced to ash. I set the letter gently on the table, smoothing it out, my hands shaking. But then, as I reached for the Bible to put it back, something else caught my eye. The back cover was bulging slightly, uneven. I frowned, sliding my fingers along the inside lining until they brushed against a hidden flap. Her new house wasn't just a house, it was a palace. Gated, manicured, polished to perfection, white stone columns framed the entrance like it was some temple of wealth, while imported cars lined the driveway. I stood at the edge of the property with my heart hammering against my ribs, my work boots sinking into the gravel. I had spent years giving her everything I had, and here she was, surrounded by everything I never could. I gripped the iron gate until my knuckles turned white. My reflection looked back at me in the shiny metal, wrinkled shirt, calloused hands, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. I rang the buzzer. The gate clicked open. When I reached the door, it was my daughter who answered. She wore a silk robe, her hair tied neatly, diamond studs in her ears. She looked like a stranger, Dad. Her tone wasn't surprise. It was irritation. I swallowed hard. Why? My voice cracked, raw with everything I'd held inside. Why did you do it? Why did you laugh? After all I've given up. After everything I've done for you, why? Her eyes narrowed. She crossed her arms. Because you embarrass me. The words hit harder than any slap could have. I stumbled back a step, my chest tightening. Embarrass you? I worked double shifts, sold my wedding ring, starved so you could eat. And I embarrass you? My voice rose, echoing through the empty foyer behind her. She didn't flinch. If anything, she grew colder. You're a janitor, Dad, that's all anyone sees. And now it's all I see. This family. This life. I can't afford to be dragged down by your failures. Her words sliced me open. I felt the tears sting my eyes, but I forced them back. My voice cracked into something desperate, pleading. If your mother were alive, she'd weep to see you now. For a flicker of a second, something shifted in her eyes. Shame, maybe. But it vanished just as quickly. Behind her, a shadow moved. The groom appeared, leaning casually against the doorway, his smirk wide and sharp. Everything okay, sweetheart? She turned slightly, her posture softening toward him, hardening against me. Yes, he was just leaving. I looked at him, at the way he draped his arm around her shoulder like she was already property, like I was nothing more than dirt at his doorstep. My chest heaved. Do you really think you can erase me that easily? The groom chuckled, the sound mocking. Erase you? You erased yourself the moment you stayed in that janitor closet instead of building something better. You're nothing to us. The door inched closer to closing. My daughter's hand gripped it, her face cold, her eyes avoiding mine. I slammed my palm against the frame, my voice low but shaking with rage. "You took my pride. But mark my words, I'll take your crown." Her lips parted, but before she could speak, the groom leaned forward, whispering with venom. "Try it. See how far a mop bucket gets you." Then, with one hard shove, the door slammed shut. I stood there, my reflection distorted in the glass panels, the sound of the lock clicking into place sealing my humiliation. But beneath the humiliation, a fire burned, stronger, hotter. I clenched my fists, staring at the mansion towering above me, and whispered into the night, "You've built your palace on lies, and I'll be the one to bring it crashing down." As I walked back down the long driveway, the echo of their laughter still ringing in my ears, I felt the weight of years of silence lifting. They thought I was weak. They thought I was beaten, but they had just declared war. The building smelled different at night. During the day it reeked of polished wood, perfume, and money. But when midnight fell and the last executive slipped into their luxury car, silence took over, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. That was my time. My badge still worked. I was still the janitor, invisible in their eyes. That invisibility, once a curse, was now my weapon. I pushed my mop bucket down the hallway, the wheels squeaking against marble floors, echoing in the empty corridors. But tonight, the bucket wasn't for mopping. Tucked inside beneath a ragged cloth sat a worn leather folder and a small digital recorder. I wasn't here to clean. I was here to hunt. Room by room I slipped into offices I had cleaned for years. I knew which doors squeaked, which locks were left lazily undone, which drawers executives trusted to hold their secrets. I opened filing cabinets, pulled folders, snapped photos with a cheap camera on my phone. The deeper I dug, the uglier it became. A charity ledger showed millions donated on paper, but the accounts told a different story. Money siphoned off into shell corporations. Receipts detailed payments to politicians for consulting fees. Contracts falsified with names I recognized. Names from the newspapers. Men and women who preached integrity while their hands were buried in dirt. Page after page. Lie after lie. And as I turned those pages, I realized the irony. The same hands that had scrubbed toilets, emptied trash, and wiped away other people's filth were now holding documents that could bring down an empire. These hands weren't weak. They were dangerous. I set the recorder in my pocket to on before slipping into the boardroom. The polished table stretched like a runway, lined with leather chairs. A laptop glowed faintly at the far end, left behind. I sat down, my pulse racing, and pulled up files on the desktop, emails, dozens of them. Executives congratulating each other on creative accounting, plans to funnel money offshore, even references to my daughter's name, used as a pawn to sign documents she barely understood. My throat burned as I read. They weren't just corrupt. They were building their future on her signature, her silence, and my erasure. I copied what I could onto a flash drive, my fingers trembling as the progress bar crawled across the screen. That's when I heard voices. Panic jolted through me. I ducked into the janitor's closet across the hall, pressing the door shut until only a sliver of light peeked through the crack. Two executives entered the boardroom, their voices low but sharp. If the old man ever tries to challenge this, it won't matter. Everything's locked under her name now. I clenched my fists. They were talking about me. Still, the other said, we can't leave loose ends. If he gets suspicious, if he starts asking questions. The first laughed, smug and cruel. He's a janitor. Let him mop floors. That's all he's good for. The words stung, but they also steeled me. I wasn't just mopping floors anymore. I was recording every word. I slipped the recorder closer to the crack in the door, catching every syllable. The closet smelled of ammonia and old rags, the same place I had once hidden from embarrassment. Tonight it became my sanctuary, my fortress. Their conversation confirmed everything. They weren't just laundering money. They were silencing anyone who stood in their way, and my daughter was their shield. When they finally left, I emerged, drenched in sweat but clutching the recorder like a lifeline. I returned to my mop bucket, wiping down counters and polishing brass handles like nothing had happened, masking my movements with the routine of a servant. But I wasn't their servant anymore. By the end of the week, I had stacks of copied documents hidden under loose floorboards in my apartment. files that showed embezzlement, proof of tax fraud, evidence of falsified charity funds, enough to choke them in court, enough to expose them to the world. Each night I added more. Each morning I returned to work, invisible, silent, gathering threads until I held the whole web in my hands. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, but power has a price. One night, as I slipped into another office, the recorder tucked into my shirt pocket, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I froze, my hand halfway through a drawer stuffed with contracts. Funny time to be cleaning, isn't it? The voice was low, suspicious. I turned slowly, the papers still in my hand. An executive stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his eyes narrowed. He wasn't smiling. "Why are you here at this hour?" he asked. The question hung in the air like a knife. The documents trembled in my hands, the recorder still running in my pocket. My cover, my invisibility was cracking. And in that moment, one truth hit me harder than anything else. I wasn't the janitor anymore. I was the threat. I had never spoken to a journalist in my life. People like me didn't talk to the press. We read their stories on crumpled newspapers left on subway seats. But that night, sitting in my dim apartment surrounded by piles of stolen files, I dialed the number scrawled on the back of a business card I'd found slipped under my door. A reporter's name. I didn't ask how she knew where to find me. I just knew it was time. Her voice was sharp, professional, but curious. "Do you have something to show me?" I sent her everything. The ledgers, the contracts, the emails, the recordings. I didn't put my name on it. No return address, no explanation. Just proof. 2 weeks later, the storm broke. The night of the charity gala arrived, their annual event broadcast live, a parade of diamonds and designer gowns. I stood outside at first, hidden among the crowd of onlookers pressing against velvet ropes. Flashes of cameras lit the night like lightning, the red carpet gleaming under the glow of spotlights. My daughter walked in beside her husband, smiling for the cameras, the perfect picture of wealth and grace. But I saw the tremor in her smile, the stiffness in her posture. She knew. She had read the papers that morning. The first headline had screamed, "Corruption scandal, millions missing from charity funds." Inside the ballroom, the scene glittered. Towers of champagne glasses shimmered under chandeliers. Waiters glided between tables with trays of caviar. Laughter and music filled the air, but beneath it all was a current of unease, a murmur traveling from guest to guest. The journalists had come not as guests, but as predators. I slipped inside, blending with the crowd in a suit I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. It was tight at the shoulders, but clean, pressed, borrowed dignity. No mop, no bleach, no badge. Just me. The speeches began, the groom's father stepping to the stage, his voice booming with false pride. "We are honored tonight to celebrate our success, our charity, our family." That was the trigger. A reporter's voice rang out, cutting through the applause. "What about the missing funds? The offshore accounts? The bribes?" The room froze. Cameras swung toward the stage. Flashes erupted like gunfire. The groom's father faltered, his words tangling on his tongue. "That's absurd, baseless." But another reporter shouted, holding up documents I had provided. "We have proof. Signed contracts, forged names. Care to explain why your charity accounts match your personal bank deposits?" Chaos erupted. Guests murmured, some gasping, others stepping back as microphones thrust forward. The music stopped. The air crackled with panic. I moved closer, weaving through the stunned crowd. My daughter stood near the stage, tears streaking her makeup as questions bombarded her. "Did you know your signature was on these transfers? Were you complicit in the fraud? How long has your family been stealing from the poor?" She shook her head, crying, clutching her husband's arm. But the cameras didn't care about her denials. They cared about her tears, and then it happened, the moment I would never forget. A waiter stumbled as the groom shoved past him. The champagne tower wobbled, the glasses clinking together in a fragile chorus. And then, in slow motion, the tower collapsed. Crystal shards rained down, champagne flooding the marble floor, the sound of glass shattering, piercing the air. Their perfect image, their untouchable empire, had shattered with it. Gasps filled the room. People scrambled back, dresses and tuxedos splashed with champagne, shoes crunching on broken glass. I stood still, watching the chaos unfold, my chest rising with something I hadn't felt in years. Justice. The groom's father shouted over the noise, his face red with rage. "This is slander, lies!" But the cameras caught every word, every drop of sweat, every crack in his mask, and then silence because I had stepped forward, no longer in my janitor's uniform. No mop bucket, no bleach-stained hands visible. Just me in my best clothes standing tall. The crowd parted. Whispers spreading like wildfire. That's him. The father. The janitor. Dozens of eyes turned, cameras flashing, microphones lifting. My daughter's tear-streaked face turned toward me, her mouth parting in shock. I met her eyes, steady, unflinching. For years she had erased me. Tonight there was no erasing me. The room held its breath. And I thought, this is only the beginning. The flashes blinded me as every head in the ballroom turned my way. The microphones reached forward like hungry mouths. My daughter's tears froze midstream, her lips trembling. I took another step into the light, and in that silence, I knew. Everything I had scrubbed away was about to come crashing back down on them. The courthouse smelled of dust and old paper, the kind of smell that clung to places where lives were dismantled piece by piece. I sat in the wooden bench reserved for the public, my hands folded, my body stiff in a suit that still didn't feel like it belonged to me. The air buzzed with murmurs from journalists and onlookers, their pens poised, cameras ready to capture every tremor of this trial. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise!" We stood as the judge entered, his black robe trailing like a shadow. The room settled into silence, a silence thick enough to choke on. The trial had begun. The groom's father sat at the defense table, his once confident face now pale, his jaw clenched. Beside him, the groom shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Their lawyers whispered frantically, flipping through stacks of papers. And then there was my daughter. She sat alone, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't look at me, not once. Even when she raised her hand to take the oath, her gaze never wavered from the wood grain beneath her. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the evidence, the missing millions from the charity, the false contracts, the offshore accounts. The journalist I had trusted sat near the front, nodding slightly as the files I had leaked were presented in court. The groom's father shifted uncomfortably as document after document was read aloud. Exhibit B, bank transfers totaling $3.4 million into accounts held offshore. Exhibit F, falsified. Signatures authorizing the transfer of charitable funds into corporate accounts. Each word echoed through the chamber, a hammer striking nail after nail into the coffin of their empire. And then came the moment I had dreaded, the mention of my daughter's name. Exhibit J, signed authorizations under the name of the defendant's daughter-in-law. The clerk held up the paper for the court to see. Her signature, neat and deliberate, sprawled across the bottom. My chest tightened. The prosecutor looked at her directly. "Did you sign this document, ma'am?" She hesitated, her lips parting, but no words came. Her silence was louder than any confession. I wanted to stand, to shout. She didn't understand what she was signing. They manipulated her. But I couldn't. I had to sit there, powerless, while the world saw her not as a victim, but as an accomplice. For the first time, she glanced up, toward the judge, the lawyers, the cameras. But not toward me. I leaned forward slightly, my voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough in my own ears to echo. "All I ever wanted was your respect." The words burned my throat, a truth I had carried for decades. Not wealth, not recognition, just respect. She flinched, her shoulders tightening, but her gaze dropped again back to the table, away from me. The courtroom pressed on, relentless. More documents were read, more recordings played. My own hidden camera footage echoed through the speakers, my daughter's voice filling the chamber. "He's nothing to me now, just the help." Gasps rippled across the room. She covered her face with her hands, her body shaking, but I didn't feel victory. I felt hollow. The prosecution closed their case with precision, outlining the fraud in brutal detail. The groom's father sat rigid, sweat glistening on his forehead. The groom muttered under his breath, shaking his head. My daughter remained still, broken. Finally, the judge leaned forward, his gaze sharp, cutting through the silence. He looked directly at the defense table. "You've heard the charges. You've seen the evidence. Before I pass this to the jury, do you have anything to say in your defense?" The room held its breath. I stared at my daughter, my heart torn between rage and sorrow. She didn't look up. She didn't move. The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but I knew. We were standing on the edge of a cliff. The judge's words hung in the air like a blade. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Every camera turned toward my daughter. The room leaned forward, and I sat there waiting, bracing for the answer that could shatter everything. The courtroom felt like a cage, every eye trained on the witness stand. My daughter sat there, shoulders trembling, her hands clenched together in her lap. The silence was unbearable, a silence thick with judgment, pity, and curiosity. The judge repeated his question, his voice calm but heavy. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" At first she didn't move. The cameras zoomed in, catching every quiver of her lip, every glisten of tears she tried to hold back. Finally her voice broke through the silence, fragile and raw. I laughed at him because they told me to." A collective murmur spread through the crowd. She wiped at her cheeks, smearing her makeup. "They said," her voice cracked, "they said if I wanted to be respected in this family, I had to show them I wasn't like him, that I was above him." She sobbed openly now, clutching the edge of the stand as if it might hold her together. "So I did it. I mocked him. I mocked the only man who ever loved me. I called him just the janitor, because I thought it would make me belong." The reporters pounced, scribbling furiously. Neighbors who had whispered about me in grocery aisles leaned forward, their expressions shifting from scorn to shock. The groom, sitting at the defense table, shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. When her sobs grew louder, he leaned back, muttered something to his lawyer, and turned his face away. He was already abandoning her. Her humiliation was complete, not in the papers, not in rumors, but here in front of the world. I should have felt vindicated. I should have relished the moment. But as I sat there, hearing her confession, I felt nothing but a hollow ache. I had wanted respect, not this public breaking. I had wanted acknowledgement, not devastation. She turned toward me suddenly, her eyes swollen, searching for something. Mercy, forgiveness, maybe just proof that I still saw her as my daughter. "Dad," she whispered, her voice hoarse, but I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old janitor's badge. The plastic was scratched, the lettering faded, but it was more than an ID. It was every night shift, every missed meal, every sacrifice I had made to keep her alive and safe. I placed it on the bench beside me. The small sound it made, a soft click against the wood, echoed louder than any speech I could have given. That was my statement. I stood, slowly, deliberately. My daughter's tear-streaked face followed me as I walked down the aisle toward the exit. My boots echoed on the marble floor, steady and final. I didn't look back. The courtroom doors swung open, and the sunlight hit me like a spotlight. Outside I could hear the roar of the media frenzy, the shouted questions, the flashing cameras. But inside all I heard was silence. My silence heavier than any words I could have thrown at her. Behind me the gavel struck, the trial pressing on without me. But I was done. I had carried my humiliation for years, and now it was hers to bear. I reached the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the sterile walls. For the first time I felt free, not victorious, not joyful, just free. And then I heard it, "Dad, please, don't leave me." Her voice cracked through the hallway, desperate, trembling. I stopped, my hand on the door, the cold metal beneath my palm. My heart twisted, the years of love and sacrifice clashing with the fresh wounds of betrayal. I didn't turn. Not yet. Her footsteps pounded against the floor as she ran after me, her sobs filling the space between us. "Dad, please, don't leave me." The words clung to the air like a plea to God, and for the first time in a long time I realized she wasn't just fighting for her pride anymore. She was fighting for me. The months after the trial passed like the slow turn of seasons. The world forgot quickly, moving on to the next scandal, the next headline. But I didn't. I traded marble floors and bleach for sawdust and oil. The old storage unit at the edge of town became mine, transformed with chipped paint, repaired shelves and the steady hum of tools. It was a repair shop now, small, modest, but mine. I fixed watches, sharpened blades, mended furniture. Work that left my hands aching but not empty. For the first time in decades, I wasn't scrubbing away someone else's filth. I was building something of my own. Every morning I flipped the sign on the door from closed to open, and a quiet satisfaction filled me. No bosses, no in-laws smirking at my worth. Just me, my tools, and the dignity of honest work. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the dusty front window, the bell above the door chimed. I looked up from a clock I was repairing, and my heart faltered. It was her, my daughter. She wasn't draped in diamonds anymore. No silk robe, no polished arrogance. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, her face bare of makeup. She looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of the trial and the collapse of her world had stripped her down to something real again. Dad. Her voice was quiet, fragile, almost childlike. I set my tools down, my fingers steady, but my heart unsteady. She took a step closer, tears glistening in her eyes. "I came to say I'm sorry." The words trembled in the air, raw and naked. "I was blinded," she whispered. "By them, by the money, the image. I thought if I buried you I'd belong, but I lost myself, and I lost you." Her hands shook as she reached for me, then pulled back as if she wasn't sure she had the right anymore. "Please, forgive me." I stared at her, the daughter I had raised through fevers, through loneliness, through nights when I had nothing but her smile to keep me alive. The daughter who had turned my life into a punchline, who had broken me in front of the world. Forgiveness wasn't simple. It wasn't automatic. I stood slowly, walking toward the window where my old janitor's uniform now hung on a wooden hanger. The blue fabric was faded, the pockets frayed, the smell of bleach long gone but never forgotten. I had placed it there intentionally, not as shame but as memory. As a badge of survival, I touched the sleeve lightly. "This," I said, my voice calm, "is who I was, and I'll never erase it again." She looked at the uniform, then back at me, her face breaking with grief. "Dad, I don't care what you wore. I care that you're my father, and I threw that away." Her voice cracked, tears streaming freely. "But if there's any part of you that still loves me, please let me try again." The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of sacrifice and betrayal. My chest ached with memories. The little girl holding out spilled water, the teenager ashamed of bleach on my clothes, the bride who laughed at me. I stepped forward and placed my hands, those scarred, calloused hands, on her shoulders. She flinched at first, then stilled. "I will always love you," I said, "but respect is earned, not demanded. If you want my forgiveness, then prove it. Day by day, word by word, action by action." She nodded quickly, desperately, tears dripping onto her sweater. "I will, I swear I will." I pulled her into an embrace, her body shaking against mine. For the first time in months I let myself hold her. Not the image of her, not the shame of her, but the girl I had raised. But my embrace was not without conditions. I whispered into her ear, "Never again. If you ever forget where you came from, if you ever forget who stood for you when no one else did, remember this uniform. Remember these hands." When we pulled apart, she nodded, her eyes clearer than I had seen them in years. I turned back toward the shop window, the sunlight catching on the uniform. It didn't look like defeat anymore. It looked like survival. Like pride, betrayal had broken me. But revenge had rebuilt me, and now forgiveness on my terms would define me. As she left the shop that day, her figure small against the fading light, I knew the story wasn't over. But for once I was writing it. What would you have done if your own child mocked you like that? Would you forgive, or would you walk away forever? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption.